the next thing that I want to have a chat about was breakdown issues in bulls. Bulls are the laziest creatures that ever existed. They sit in the paddock for 10 months of the year and only get asked to work for 2, and they always seem to have a sickie within the first week of going out to work. So there's a list as long as my arm as to why bulls break down, and that's not really the focus of today's topic. What I wanted to chat about today was more specifically a particular syndrome that's being noted in young virgin bulls working in their first season. So the reason why I picked this topic is, again, it's something that can have a significant effect on your bottom line, both through the loss of the value of the bull, particularly if he's not insured and all you get is your meat value back for him, if he's fit to load, that is. But probably more importantly, a decrease in your conception rate. So depending how early you pick up these issues, if you're not noticing it until you pull the bulls out at the end of the season, you might have a complete crash and burn with your scanning that year. Or if you happen to catch it really early and swap him out, you might have got out of jail free. So the particular syndrome that I want to have a talk about today, the proper name for it is Balanoposthitis, which is basically a fancy vet term. I've heard of farmers actually calling it the exploding willy syndrome, which is probably a bit of an easier way to remember what it is. But essentially what it is it's just a swelling of the penis and the tissues around it. And it can be in varying degrees. So bull in photo A here, you can see that he's got quite a lot of swelling there around his sheath. In photo B, so this is a really mild form. So it's just some sort of small little round red nodules, which probably wouldn't cause many bulls too many problems, through to the photo C here, where that's a pretty extreme photo of a really horrible ulcerated sore lesion that you can see there. So this is probably something that has been noticed by vets and producers across Australia enough times now that people are starting to question whether or not there's actually something in it. Is there something infectious going along behind this, as opposed to it just being a general breakdown from an injury during serving. But probably what's been a repeat sort of factor is that it's in young bulls that are being used for the first time. So either yearling bulls going out for their first season, or 2-year-old bulls again going into their first mating. And then it just causes issues with your serving. Obviously he's pretty sore, so he's going to stop working, and if he doesn't stop working, then he can do some secondary damage as well, which is what we can see in these photos here. So photo A, this is a bull that's prolapsed his prepuce, and obviously damaged the tissues which normally aren't exposed to the outside. Photo B, again, is another bull that's obviously just kept on working and working, and those little pustules have now turned out to be quite a horrible, nasty, big wound. And photo C is a bull which had some sort of insult at some point, and it's healed up and scarred, and he can't actually get the tip of his penis out. So if you look at the centre of that photo, you'll actually see the tip's trying to come out, but it just can't because it's physically too constricted. So these are sort of some secondary problems that can occur from it, and sometimes it's not picked up until these sort of problems occur later down the line. So why is it happening? Again, a bit like the kite tox, we're not 100% sure. There's a bit of a theory that it could have something to do with bovine herpes virus, particularly type 1, but I believe type 5 might also be implicated in it somehow. So herpes virus is pretty common. Most herds in Australia have probably got some degree of exposure to it. It can cause a heap of other different clinical signs, other than just reproductive forms. So it can cause a respiratory disease, which is this photo on the left. That's a windpipe from a cow that's been opened, and you can see it's all horrible and red and ulcerated inside. So that's probably the most common syndrome, usually seen either at time of weaning or in a feedlot. Then this photo in the middle of, which is a heifer's vulva, you can get sort of those same little pustular type lesions inside the vulva. Generally, they're probably not seen in a beef cow situation because who goes around having a look in the cow's fannies? It just doesn't really happen very often. So those are probably a bit more subtle, and you wouldn't often see that. Then it can also cause congenital defects in calves and disease in newborn calves. So this calf in the middle, you can see he's been born with a cloudy eye. He had it on both sides. So that's not a pink eye. That was a congenital problem that he was born with. And this little calf underneath who has a meningitis syndrome, and it can cause abortions in your cows as well. So it might just be sort of sporadic here and there, or if you've got a naive herd and it comes in, it can sort of cause what they call abortion storms. So herpes virus is certainly causes a heap of different clinical syndromes, and it's quite a well-known pathogen. So there is some theory that maybe this is what's causing the problems with these young bulls. And the scenario that I can sort of think of is that you have these stud bulls in particular. If you look at what happens in their lifetime, they're born and they're generally kept in the same cohort. They're kept with their paddock mates through to sale day. And then once they're sold and they go off to their new farm, that might be the very first time that they've ever been exposed to another group of animals and another mix of disease. So if he's lived his whole merry life without talking to too many other bulls or cows, he may never have seen herpes virus before. And the first time that he sees it might be when you put him out with your cows. It might be endemic in your herd. He picks up the infection at that time, which is probably the worst time that you can have troubles with your willy. And then you see this horrible ulcerated syndrome where the whole penis swells up, and that's obviously aggravated when he continues to serve. So that's certainly one theory at the moment of what might be happening. In terms of what you can do to treat it, there's no specific treatment for herpes virus in cattle. It's just a matter of managing the symptoms and trying to correct those secondary complications if they develop. Sometimes in valuable bulls, you can do surgical correction of when their prepuce is prolapse, or if they have some scar tissue that's stopping them from being able to extend. In some situations, you can fix that surgically. Otherwise, most people probably opt to fix it by just cutting his head off. So there's probably a few things that you can do from a prevention point of view. At the moment, trialling the use of a vaccine. So there's two vaccines out there. There's an intranasal live vaccine, which is a one-shot vaccine. Otherwise, there's also a kill vaccine, which is an injectable, but that requires 2 doses as a course. So at the moment, neither of these vaccines are labelled registered use for protection of bulls in this particular scenario, and that's a point that needs to be made, is it's very much off-label, and there's no proof that it actually works. But it's something that we're certainly looking at to try and see if it helps try and prevent these syndromes from happening. We're giving these naive bulls a bit of protection before they go out and work. The other thing that you can do from a client point of view, once you've bought the bull and you've got him home, most people tend to keep them on their own, or maybe with a couple of other young bulls in a paddock up until the point of mating, and they don't get exposure to anyone else. So one thing that you can do to try and expose him to this pathogen before a critical time, like at mating, is to commingle him with some of your other existing livestock. So either cull cows that are going to have their heads cut off, and it doesn't really matter if they get in calf, or steers, some of the dry stock that you've got. It just gives them a chance to see that virus before they go out and work. But at the end of the day, we just need a lot more research into the problem. What's sort of been happening is people have bulls break down, and if he's not insured, typically they just go off to the abattoir, and that's it. Otherwise, if he's insured, then I'll usually get a phone call to come out and do a assessment on him for an insurance claim. And so there's there's probably bulls out there with this sort of syndrome that I'm not seeing, and don't get a chance to collect samples and find out if herpes virus is actually what's causing it. Likewise, even with the bulls that are insured, I've certainly had the conversation with a lot of people about whether herpes virus could be the problem and what's caused it, but people are generally unwilling to spend more money on a bull that's already basically worthless to them, and that's fair enough. And so, yeah, we've sort of got this scenario now where a lot of us think that this might be the problem, but we don't have enough solid evidence to prove that that's exactly what's going on.
Yes, Tim, would you mind just talking about the possible sequelae, the flow on from bovine herpes virus into adult bulls and some of the things that might be associated with that early infection, so that the chronic manifestation, if you like?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, Tim. So, being a herpes virus, it can certainly come back again at a later point in time. So there are some animals which I guess we could describe them as a carrier animal. So under a period of stress, they will start shedding the virus again. So that certainly is a scenario where the bull might see the infection early and then get over it. But then when he's stressed, either through lack of nutrition when he's out there working, it might come back out again. And that could either be expressed as a clinical syndrome itself, or he could just be shedding that virus, and any other neighbour animals around him could be affected by that. There's been a couple of bulls which have had secondary troubles that I've done surgery on, then they've been thrown back out. I need to break down again the next year, and then we haven't bothered looking at them again. So whether or not that's exactly what's happened is that they've just started shedding the virus and they've had a relapse of the clinical signs again, or whether they're just bulls that were prone to an injury and they've gone and done it again. I don't really have enough data there around that. Yeah, and I guess that probably is where there is value in looking at using a vaccine to build this immunity rather than natural exposure, because if we can give them enough protection through the vaccine, then that's certainly a lot safer, because with the vaccine they theoretically shouldn't be able to shed the virus, so they'll get the protection without shedding it during a period of stress, as opposed to what they may do if it was a natural infection.